All right, let's begin with the big lead story. We're discussing India's fast-moving consumer goods or FMCG markets. Value growth has fallen 16.5% sequentially in May compared with the month of April as per a report, signaling reduced consumer spends on daily essentials due to rising prices across categories. Is this a trend which will continue? Kritika Arora brings you this special report.
Are Indians buying smaller sachets of shampoos? Why did the heatwave fail to spur demand for air conditioners and refrigerators? That's the big question weighing on everyone's mind. Remember, consumption is one of the key drivers of India's economy, and a dip in demand is surely not good news. The demand for fast-moving consumer goods was 16% lower in May in comparison with the month of April. Even sales of refrigerators and air conditioners fell by 15% in the month of May, when several northern and central states battled extreme heat waves. Here are some more figures. Confectionery and home care category sales fell 10% in May month-on-month, while sales of personal care products and packaged food also fell by 5% during the month. Experts say a persistent price hike has reshaped consumer demand, and people are now holding off big purchases in the hope prices will fall in near future. What more? Consumers are also buying smaller packets of atta and cream as inflation continues to eat into the household savings. Prices in FMCG space have increased around 20% in the last 9 months since the companies have started to pass the spike in their input cost to customers. For companies too, the cost of everything from oil to logistics to packaging cost has gone up considerably in the last 1 year. But all is not lost, as an excise duty cut on fuel and several other governmental steps to rein in inflation are expected to bear fruit in the weeks to come.
The IMC is monitoring prices on a daily basis between food and consumer affairs. So we are using more and more scientific methodologies.
Companies are hopeful of a 10% reduction in input costs, but it remains to be seen how quickly the relief will be passed on to the end consumer.
And to speak more on this, I'm joined now by Siddhartha Sanyal, Chief Economist and Head Research, Bandhan Bank. I'm also speaking with Akshay D'Souza, CMO of Bizom, who's put out that report we're quoting. Akshay, great to have you on the show. Siddhartha, welcome back as always. Let me begin with you, Mr. D'Souza, on what the findings of the report are. If you can give us some of those details to start off with.
So thanks for having me, Tamanna. So firstly, one of the things that we are seeing is, companies in FMCG have typically been banking on price-led growth, right? So I think multiple rounds of price increases. Finally, I think consumers have lapped all of it until the last month. But I think right now what consumers are actually saying in May, this is as far as we go. There is a move to look at value packs on the one side, which means they'll not necessarily go into smaller sachets. So they're willing to look at a slightly higher. So for example, if your biscuit packet at ₹5 gives you five biscuits, but the biscuit packet ₹10 gives you 12 biscuits. It's a very different scenario. So consumers are looking at value, and I think that's what is coming out very clearly on the one side. On the other side, we are seeing that in discretionary categories, companies are looking at hooking in consumers for a longer time. So they're offering value at multiple SKUs put together. Bundled packs is kind of one of the trends that seems to be coming at the moment. But I think what's clear now is price-driven growth alone is not sufficient. I think there has to be a move towards driving consumption also, and that's really the trend for the future.
Mr. Sanyal, do you see this as a long-standing trend? This is, of course, one data point that we're seeing for the month of May, but prices have been increasing consistently. Has the penny finally dropped? Yes, Mr. Sanyal.
Hopefully, this doesn't turn out to be a very long-standing trend. Typically, what happens in case of India's growth, the private final consumption venture is by far the biggest contributor. And typically, Indian growth is usually so stable and so solid because private final consumption expenditure in the context of India is typically strong and quite stable. Now, what is very interesting at the moment, I'll not see only maybe the last few quarters or even last 1 year. If I see since the beginning of COVID, last 2 years, the CAGR of growth, overall GDP growth in India was sub 1%, just about 0.75%. And the CAGR of growth of private final consumption expenditure was also of a very similar order. So it has been somewhat subdued, even though there has been a big dip, and from there was a recovery. If I take a slightly wider window of about 2 years, it has already been significantly subdued. At this moment, it's taking a fresh round of hit because of the price rise, because of the hit and dent in the disposable income and people's wallet. But going ahead, typically it follows some kind of a trajectory of natural growth in the especially in the bottom end of the pyramid. So we have to figure out over the course of the next few months whether we go back to that normal trend. But if not, that's a very significant challenge for the overall recovery process.
All right. We'll try and fix your connection, Mr. Sanyal. It's slightly patchy, and I want to get more details on how you see this as a continuing trend. Meanwhile, just to add on to what Mr. D'Souza was saying, CMIE has put out its Consumer Sentiment Index, which says that consumer sentiments fell sharply in the last week of May, more so in rural India rather than in urban areas. Now, so far, Mr. D'Souza, the sense was that as food prices were going up, as food inflation was going up, the general thought was that this is good for rural India, right? Because their incomes were going up. But that doesn't seem to be the case, at least as far as CMI is concerned. Their estimate or analysis is this is because of the ban on wheat and sugar exports as well. Do you see this rural-urban divide panning out in your data as well?
So up until now, we are seeing that this trend of drop is similar across rural and urban. If anything, in May, urban large cities, at least the cities that are 5 million plus cities in our database, they are showing, in fact, a steeper drop than the rural at the moment. But rural trends for drop are in line. The whole piece around the wheat and sugar ban, I think in a way it'll do its good to kind of cool prices locally, because finally one of the big things that we learned from the Indonesia palm oil crisis is you can actually use global demand supply for at least for food products that you export to benefit your local pricing, and that is one of those things that I think the Indian government kind of is picking up as a leaf from the Indonesian government palm oil ban, and hoping to cool down prices locally while also doing its food diplomacy. So after the vaccine diplomacy, I think this is another thing that will kind of help India move forward in terms of achieving its global objectives. But I think what importantly it will do in the short and medium term is it will drop prices locally. And I think that is good because you are looking at a need basket. With every increase in price, the common man, there are millions of people kind of going into poverty and hunger. And I think that's a trend that we need to arrest quickly. And I think this is what will do that job for us.
In terms of further trends, and I was going through your report, Akshay, I also noticed that you're looking at a change in the way people are behaving in terms of FMCG and buying smaller packs, that they're deferring the purchases, hoping that prices will come down. Are you also seeing that with discretionary items?
We are seeing it also with discretionary items. I think almost all categories that we track in FMCG are seeing this, are seeing down trading clearly. I think that's without a doubt, that's a trend that's happening. But what's happening is, people are now also looking at value packs. So especially now we look at personal care. A lot of people are now looking at buying bundled packs which offer greater value than a single unit. So if the sum of parts is obviously greater than the single unit, they're kind of looking at that if their usage is around that side. So that's happening in soaps, that's happening in perfumes, that's happening in shampoos and multiple such products also. So the whole trend around deriving value is here to stay, and I think that's going to be one of the levers that I see a lot of brands and FMCG companies using to balance consumption along with this price-led growth. price-led growth alone is not going to be lapped up by consumers all in. I think that's very clear. This is as far as price elasticity will go. I think you're at a point where you will need to balance consumption with price growth for you to kind of develop growth for yourself.
I've got Mr. Sanyal back on the lines. Mr. Sanyal, I wanted to look at the big picture. What is looking more vulnerable right now in terms of demand, urban areas or rural areas?
If you see the current style of inflation, it is coming from multiple sources. Now, that is not a great news typically for urban poor, because in case of the rural economy, food price rise at times provides some support for certain segments of the population. But for the urban poor, the transportation cost hits more, the food cost hits more, and some of the other costs like other kinds of energy costs or metal costs, etc., are common to everyone. So in a way, the bottom end of the pyramid in urban areas might see some additional pressure if it continues for a very long time.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Sanyal, Mr. D'Souza, for joining us on the story this evening. We're beginning to see the pressure. We will have to look at what the numbers tell us, and we'll come back and see whether that price pressure and impact on demand has continued through the month of June as well.